right, I'm going to jump right into stuff here now today because there is so much going on, um, and just sort of to maybe a warning. Um, it's going to get worse as the days and the weeks go on. This summer is going to be lit. And if you feel like you need to take a break, that's totally fine. And it's also important to remember to get enough rest and to eat right and to do things that make you happy because it's just constant what's coming at us. So let me jump into the material I wanted to cover today. Now I've got all these notes and I don't know which box they're in. Here we go. All right. A lot of people asked about the budget reconciliation bill that is currently in Congress. It passed the House of Representatives just before 7 o'clock this morning, and it is a really, really important moment in American history because this is an omnibus bill. That is, they have thrown everything, actually, including the kitchen sink, in it. And it's designed to put everything that Trump and the MAGA Republicans want into place. And because of that, it is a really good window into what they want for America. So, one of the things you have heard a lot about is, I suspect, is that the bill cuts about $715 billion in healthcare spending, mostly out of Medicaid. And it cuts about $300 billion out of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, which helps to provide nutrition assistance for poorer Americans. And about 2.7 million American households will lose some or all of their benefits under these SNAP cuts. And this thing that showed up yesterday, which I confess I had missed, and most other people had missed, including I think the Republican Party, was that because the bill adds so massively to the debt, which they're trying to say it doesn't do, it will also trigger a law that was passed earlier but repassed in 2010, informally known as the Pay-Go law. And what that means is that if you're going to raise a lot of debt in one area, you automatically have to cut it in others. And Pay-Go requires cuts to mandatory spending. And this was designed to kind of put the screws to the Democrats. But what it does here is those automatic cuts to mandatory spending mean that there will be cuts to Medicare as well, not just Medicaid, but Medicare. Now, those cuts are capped at 4% a year under the law, but that still amounts to about $500 billion. Now, this is not all in one year. These cuts take place over a number of years, but it's a really major shredding of our social safety net in the United States. And I'll tell you a little bit about how they're justifying it in a minute, but the cuts that and the tax cuts and the benefit cuts in the bill will do something really remarkable, and that is that they will redistribute wealth massively upward, which has been happening. It happened between 1981 and 2021, and President Biden and Vice President Harris reversed that. But now we are looking at yet again this extraordinary upward motion of wealth, and between 1981 and 2021, about $50 trillion moved from the bottom 90% of Americans up to the top 1% of Americans. And that upward motion will continue under this new measure if it stays in the state it's in. So that if you are, Robert Reich ran the numbers, and if you are making between about $17,000 and $51,000 a year, you'll lose about $700 a year. If you make less than $17,000, you will lose about $1,000 a year. But if you're in the top 1% of earners, you'll gain almost $400,000 a year. It's a pretty dramatic shift. And again, the way that they are managing that is through this extension of these tax cuts and by increasing the debt limit that the American government can borrow. And that's causing a huge problem in things like the stock and the bond markets, because the many investors look at the United States and are looking at this massive assumption of debt without any way to pay it off and saying, hey, we don't trust America any longer. And that's a huge problem for the American economy. All right. So right now, the measure has passed the House. but it has not passed the Senate. And let me talk to you a little bit about that. All right, so right now the measure has passed the House, but it has not passed the Senate. And let me talk to you a little bit about that. So, or actually, let me finish with what it looks like in the House. We have this bill, so it's moving all this money upward. But one of the things that is dramatic, and very few people are talking about these things in the same breath, is that it also pours money into immigration enforcement, pours money into it. It's the largest increase of that budget ever, including I pulled the numbers about more than $46 billion to construct barriers at the border. That's both water barriers and land barriers. It is $45 billion for adult and family detention, which would be enough to detain 100,000 people at a time, and increase budgets to ICE and so on. Hugely massive money being thrown at immigration. And what's interesting about that, something else that is not really being discussed a lot, is that in fact, the Trump administration is deporting fewer undocumented immigrants every day than the Biden administration did. So who are they going to put in those detention facilities? I think that's worth having in mind. So the bill both moves money upward and pours money at immigration. And I want to pick up those two themes going forward. But let me just finish now with where the bill is currently. The bill has passed the House barely. It passed it by one vote. And that's after the far right Republicans who said they weren't going to vote for it, all but 3 of them did. But there's also the issue of the fact that the Democrats are down a number of people in the House of Representatives because of deaths, most recently Jerry Connolly of I forget where he's from, who died yesterday. So, the fact that Democrats are down is not helping our cause in this moment. So now it goes before the Senate. All right. So one of the things you need to understand about this bill is that it's being passed under budget reconciliation. Now, what the expletive does that mean? Remember that I keep talking about the Senate filibuster, and the fact that the Senate filibuster is actually a rule that that the House had in its early days, but recognized in the House that they had to find a way to make people stop talking, because otherwise they just never shut up. And the Senate never did that, because the Senate was small enough that there was enough peer pressure that people generally didn't insist on talking and talking and talking and talking, unless there was something they truly hated. And in that case, which was almost always over laws that were going to increase racial justice or racial equality, in that case, they had to hold the floor, the same way that Cory Booker held it in the House. That was not a filibuster. Held it in the House. I'm sorry, he was in the Senate too. That he held it the other day. Although it wasn't a filibuster because he wasn't stopping anything. But remember, he wasn't allowed to give up control of the floor. He could lend somebody his time, but he couldn't say, I yield the floor, which is what he finally did after 25 hours. So in the Senate, you can do that. You can filibuster by holding the floor. But they changed the rules a number of years back, a number of decades back, to say that you didn't actually even have to hold the floor. You could just say you were going to do it. And that's how the Senate ground to a halt, because anybody who didn't like a bill could just say, well, I'm going to filibuster it. So we now have this situation where in order to get anything through the Senate, you have to have 60 votes. You have to have a supermajority to break the filibuster. It's called cloture. And then you can have a normal vote, which I can't tell you how many problems I have with that, but that's not the point here. The Senate recognized that it had to make some exceptions for the filibuster or nothing would ever get done. And one of the things that they filibustered were budget matters that needed to get through every year. And those can be passed under a simple majority, and that's known as reconciliation. So this measure is going forward as budget reconciliation so that it will not need to get Democratic votes. They can do the whole thing with Republican votes. But here's a number of problems with this current bill under that system. That is, first of all, that the parliamentarian, the person in the Senate who is nonpartisan, although it's usually appointed by one party or another, is a lawyer and says, listen, this is going to pass muster legally, and this is not. You can't put in a rule about goldfish in a bill about the budget. You just can't do it. And normally the Senate listens to the Senate parliamentarian and tries to make what they do fit what the parliamentarian says. In this case, the Senate parliamentarian is almost certain to try and strip out all the measures in the bill that are not related to the budget. And there are a number of those. But a number of Republican senators are saying we're just going to ignore the Senate parliamentarians. So we'll see what happens with that. But the senators are also very concerned about the effects of the extraordinary increase in the debt on the country. So they want tax cuts for sure, but they also recognize that they're in real danger of crashing the US economy pretty profoundly if everybody in other countries takes a look at the United States and says, hey, we're out of here with our investments. That's a huge problem. So the Senate, the bill is a lot more extreme coming from the House than the Senate is likely to pass, at least. So we'll see what happens with that. But the senators are also very concerned about the effects of the extraordinary increase in the debt on the country. So they want tax cuts for sure, but they also recognize that they're in real danger of crashing the US economy pretty profoundly if everybody in other countries takes a look at the United States and says, hey, we're out of here with our investments. That's a huge problem. So the Senate, the bill is a lot more extreme coming from the House than the Senate is likely to pass, at least willingly. Now, that being said, it has always been sort of a sneaking suspicion on my part that a number of the members of the House pass stuff hoping somebody else is going to stop it, because there's a lot in this measure that's a lot to worry about. So now it's in front of the Senate, and the Senate has already said, we're going to tear it up and write it again. We'll see, because Trump is putting a huge amount of pressure on them. But now is the time, if you care about this, to put a huge amount of pressure on them yourself. Call every day and really make your voices heard on it. But the reason I wanted to start with the idea of the money moving upward combined with this extraordinary investment of money into immigration or undocumented immigration is because those two things are absolutely related. And it's going to be really important for Americans to understand that. So one of the things that has always been an issue in American history anyway, is this big fight about when we look at moments like this in our history, there's always this fight is this about economics or is this about race? And I mean, now that I've said that, think about every discussion you've ever heard about politics in the United States. And the problem with talking about them that way is they're both the same in the United States. You can talk about money and it's a cover for race, or you can talk about race and it's a cover for money. They absolutely go together. And one of the things that has absolutely gone together in our history is the attempt of very wealthy people to move money into their own hands by stirring up racism. It's just a thing. So that focus on immigration and this constant sort of immigration porn, if you will, of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem standing in front of the caged individuals at the CCOT prison in El Salvador, the videos of people with the clanking chains and all that, that's really designed to turn out a base that is white nationalist, that wants to have a white country in the United States of America. The United States of America has never been a white country. That is a complete myth. And what they are trying to do is to impose this white nationalist, white Christian nationalist vision on a multicultural country. And it's not going to go well, let me tell you. But let me unpack that just a little bit in the next 15 minutes here. So while people are watching this bill, people like me are watching this bill, a lot of other things have been going on, and I'd like to tie them all together. So one of the things that happened yesterday was President Donald J. Trump met in the Oval Office with the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, and accused his country of South Africa, of white genocide. Now, this is a myth. South Africa has very high homicide rates, but they are not exclusive to white farmers. And the white farmers make up about the white South Africans, who make up about 7% of the population of South Africa, do own about 75%. It's off the top of my head. Those numbers are probably a little fuzzy. About 75% of the land, which is a holdover from 50 years of apartheid. So, what Trump did is he kind of ambushed the president of South Africa and tried to insist that the South Africa was engaged in white genocide. And one of the pictures that he showed was not even from South Africa. It was from, I think it was from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I don't remember, but it was from a country that is very much a war-torn country right now. And he said at the time that this was what Elon Musk wanted. This attack on the Black president of South Africa is what Elon Musk wanted. Now, what he is doing with that, and with his insistence that there are white refugees from genocide in South Africa that are welcome in the United States, is really hammering this racism, this idea that America should be a white nation. So, what Trump did is he kind of ambushed the president of South Africa and tried to insist that the South Africa was engaged in white genocide. And one of the pictures that he showed was not even from South Africa. It was from, I think it was from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I don't remember, but it was from a country that is very much a war-torn country right now. And he said at the time that this was what Elon Musk wanted. This attack on the Black president of South Africa is what Elon Musk wanted. Now, what he is doing with that, and with his insistence that there are white refugees from genocide in South Africa that are welcome in the United States, is really hammering this racism, this idea that America should be a white nation. And this goes back from the present, through the 1960s and the attempt of Black Americans to be able to vote, through the 1940s and the desegregation of the U.S. Army, through the 1920s and 30s when we get a neo-Nazi movement in the United States, through the 1920s when we get the resurrection of the Ku Klux Klan, largely out of Indiana, through the turn of the century when we see the rise of lynchings really taking off after about 1889. And I could explain that whole thing now, but you've got a lot of racial lynchings after 1899, and then you go 1889. And then you go even back further into Reconstruction, you have the same thing happening there. And before that, of course, the elite enslavers, who are deliberately using racism to continue to get the poor white population to support them because they are able to concentrate wealth in their own hands through that. Trump is 100% tapping into that and trying to convince modern Americans to look away from this concentration of wealth, this extraordinary concentration of wealth, by saying, hey, you need to be afraid of the Black and brown Americans in your midst. Let me see what else. So that focus on race and racism as money concentrates upward is going to be really important to watch, because the other thing that's happening, in addition to the bill and this real doubling down on this concept of a white nation, is a number of ways in which the Trump family and the extremely wealthy Americans and people around the world are cashing in, is through the extraordinary corruption that's taking place. And I know it's hard to focus on all the stuff at once, because you're sitting there going, what are they going to do to my pension? Or what is a number of ways in which the Trump family and the extremely wealthy Americans and people around the world are cashing in, is through the extraordinary corruption that's taking place. And I know it's hard to focus on all the stuff at once, because you're sitting there going, what are they going to do to my pension? Or what are they going to do to Medicaid? Which has horrendous ramifications for the closure of rural hospitals, for example. And you're starting to think, well, I can't think about this other stuff. There's too much, but it's all the same story. So if you look at what's happening tonight, there is that meeting in the White House, that dinner in the White House, of those people, the top 220 investors in Trump's cryptocurrency. Remember, they were going to have a special dinner at the White House, and then a number of them were going to have a tour of the, special tour of the White House, because they had bought Trump's his cyber currency. They bought those tokens. Now, as soon as they got invited, many of them offloaded them, suggesting they weren't worth that much money. But the money from the trades is already in Trump's pockets. So there is that, but that's not even the biggie. I explained the other day about a stable coin and how the Trump, the organization that is the umbrella organization for Trump's digital coin, cryptocurrency, has come out with a stable coin. And a stable coin is different from normal cryptocurrency, which you shouldn't think of as currency. You should think of it as an investment, like a Beanie Baby or a tulip, or something can go up and can go down at huge rates. But stable coins are supposed to be more stable because they are pegged to some country's currency. And the way you make money with a stable coin is if somebody buys your stable coin for you to hold it, usually, you can then trade with that money and you get to keep the interest, whatever you get in the trading. So it can be extraordinarily profitable. Well, as of last night, the Trump stablecoin is trading on, let me see if I got the name of it here. I don't. It is trading on with a cryptocurrency exchange that has been banned in the United States after it admitted it was laundering money and it had to pay a $300 million fine. Now, as of last night, the Trump stablecoin is trading on that crypto exchange, on that cryptocurrency exchange. So, they're really throwing themselves into cryptocurrency, and the opportunity for the corruption in cryptocurrency is really, really off the charts. But that's not the only place we're seeing the kind of corruption that is moving money upward. You are also seeing Christian nationalism. And this is from people like J.D. Vance, just did a recent interview about this. And he talks a lot about getting rid of the other, getting rid of immigrants because it will make America lose something. Again, straight out of the 19th century. That's the language of the KKK, for example, certainly the language of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s, certainly the language of the neo-Nazis. America has never been a white country. White male Americans have dominated the government, but it has never been a white country. So he is really looking to reinforce this anti-immigrant vision because he is planning to impose Christian nationalism, to impose Christianity. And you can see the increase. This has been worrying me for a while. We were seeing the destruction of the U.S. government, but nobody was talking about what was going to come in afterward. And now you're starting to see the real emphasis on Christian things, on Christian rules, Christian laws in the United States of America, which is, of course, a complete rewriting of our history. So now, if that's all the bad news, what should we all do? Should we all go hide on under the desk? And I do. So now, if that's all the bad news, what should we all do? Should we all go hide on under the desk? And I do want to emphasize that there is significant pushback on all of this. So even where I started with the big bill that they are talking about, a lot of that got significantly cut back because there was such an outcry from the American people and from the Democrats, who did things like read aloud the clause in the bill that called for getting rid of taxes on silencers for guns and to get rid of taxes on tanning beds, things that were designed really for a small group of Republican interests. They had to cut back on their original desires for cuts to Medicaid. There have been a lot of pushback on these actual measures in the bill, but there's also been huge pushback from the courts. The courts are really holding up so far. They are really pushing back and saying, no, you can't do that. This is not okay. The decisions come down every day with them saying, no, it wasn't legal for you to get rid of the Department of Education. No, it's not legal for you to impose funds, and so on. However, so far we are seeing an increasing refusal of the administration to abide by the courts. So this is the other piece here, and that's that the administration, by trying to single out people of color, usually migrants, but not always, trying to single them out, what they are doing is they are collapsing our legal system, especially over the issue of immigration. But once it's gone, it's gone. They're collapsing due process. They're collapsing the idea of paying attention to courts. They're collapsing all of that with, again, the idea of constructing a nation in which a very few, very wealthy, rich, white, and usually Christian men rule the rest of us. So we're coming to a real crunch time. Every day feels like things are ratcheting up because the American people do not want this. They're pushing back very hard. The bond markets are not collapsing. I shouldn't use that word. The bond markets are falling. There's all sorts of ways in which this is crumbling. Trump's mind is breaking. Things are not good over there. At the same time, there are enough enablers in Congress for them to be able to do things like are in this bill to say that you essentially can't hold somebody in contempt of court unless you have put up a bond before you sued. And that's going to make it extremely difficult for for courts to have any teeth in their findings that the administration is in contempt of court. And currently 3 judges are saying they think that the administration's in contempt of court. So just as that is processing, the Republicans are trying to say, whoop, we'll take that away so that you can't actually stop the Trump administration from doing this. So the courts are going to need help. Congress is going to need help. And the American people are going to need help pushing their voices. And that's where you and I come in. I am just now off the road from my last trip. I've been on the road since September of 2023. And this is what I'm going to be dedicating myself to, is getting the word out on what's going on and how to push back against it. So once again, I would urge you to do a number of things. Call your Congress critters every day. There's the 5 apps thing on your phone you can use. Get together with friends to make sure you don't feel alone. Participate in local government, your school boards, your town government. Participate in your state government. Call people, tell them what you want. Go to town meetings, whether they're held by Democrats or Republicans. Speak up, write letters to the editor, and definitely get involved at the national level where you, as I say, you call every day, but you also talk a lot about what matters to you. Now, that's not all you can do. You can also make sure that you spread videos on social media, you spread information on social media, you push back against lies on social media. Because, for example, one of the things that you see is Republicans saying, we're not hurting Medicaid. We're not hurting Medicaid. We're helping Medicaid. But what they are arguing is that by cutting Medicaid, they're getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, which will make the program stronger. Similarly, in the past, they've talked about making Social Security available only to many, many older people. And they say we're making it better because we're going to guarantee it doesn't run out of money. Well, in my book, if you get rid of those programs, you're not strengthening them, you're weakening them. And just a reminder that the United States is significantly behind any of the 38 other nations, 38 total nations, so 37 other nations that are comparable to us in theoretically being democracies and in having market economies, in the amount of taxation our people bear. We're even significant. We're almost at the very bottom. There are 38 countries. If we even got to average, not the top, but average, we would have trillions more dollars to spend every year. But we've had such profound cuts since the 1980s. We're down there, right very close to the bottom. So this idea that somehow this is waste, fraud, and abuse is something you can absolutely push back on. But now I'm going to say something I haven't said before. I talk a lot about changing the public conversation. I talk a lot about joy and making sure you're, spending time with friends, and that itself, and being happy in what you invest in, what you invest your time in, is itself a form of resistance. But I'm going to add art and music. Art especially is enormously important in pushing back against a rising fascist government. You think of the posters you see out there, you think of the things that catch people's eye. So for those of you out there who are artists and who have something to say, print those babies off and stick them to places where it's legal to stick them. If you think about what has spread protests around the world, art is always central to it. So again, we all got to bring our A game now to push back on this rising concentration of wealth and power that has already undermined our democracy, and over the course of this summer will try to destroy it altogether. Thank you for being here. I'm going to do more and more of these, and I will increasingly. Actually, today I mostly spent doing my laundry because boy, it's been a long time. So I'm not normally. I think I'm normally a little bit better prepared here, and that will get better as the summer goes on. So thank you for being here, and we got a lot up our sleeve going forward for this summer, and we're going to do this. So thank you for being here, and I'll see you sooner than you think. Take care.